All right, everybody, I said I was going to do a short summary video of today's congressional hearing of Special Counsel Robert Hur, who was appointed to investigate Joe Biden's alleged, although it's now admitted, mishandling of classified documents, which ultimately did not culminate in any indictment or recommendation of charges because, as Robert Hur concluded, a jury would likely see Joe Biden as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory who had no ill intent when he knowingly and deliberately took classified documents and put them in a variety of places, including his garage, in damaged boxes, in open areas. Robert Hur, after investigating all of this, coming to certain very damning findings of fact, came to a rather incomprehensible conclusion of law, which was that no indictment would be warranted because no jury would convict, because Robert Hur was playing devil's advocate for a jury that, after hearing all this evidence, would surely conclude Joe Biden is just an old man with a bad memory who meant no harm by what he did. All right, he released yesterday, Robert Hur, the transcript of his interrogation, his interview with Joe Biden, which spanned 2 full days and lasted 5 whopping hours. And apparently the transcript of this interview, according to some, does not prove what Robert Hur said it proved when he summarized it in his initial report, where he described Joe Biden as not being able to remember when he was vice president, when his son Beau died, a number of other things. Robert Hur came to the conclusion that Joe Biden, had some memory problems, couldn't remember detail specifics. There are people making the argument today that the investigation interview transcript doesn't prove what Robert Hur says, actually proves the exact opposite, that Joe Biden knew very well when his son died and had to, ask the room what year it was. They are citing the same parts of this interview transcript, and people are drawing 2 very separate conclusions. I'll read through it just so that everybody can understand exactly what it says, and you'll come to your own conclusions as to whether or not Joe Biden adequately remembered the key elements of his life or did not so adequately remember the key elements of his life.
Mr. Hur, so during this time when you were living at Chain Bridge Road and there were documents related to the Penn Biden Center or the Biden Institute or the Cancer Moonshot or your book, where did you keep papers that related to those things that you were actively working on? President Biden, well, I don't know. This is what, 2017, 2018, that area? Mr. Hur, yes, sir. President Biden, remember, in this time frame, my son is either been deployed or is dying. And so it was, and by the way, there was still a lot of people at the time when I got out of the Senate that were encouraging me to run in this period, except the president. Not a mean thing to say. He just thought that she had a better shot of winning the presidency than I did. And so I hadn't at this point, even though I'm at Penn, I hadn't walked away from the idea that I may run for office again. But if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so what was happening though? What month did Beau die? Oh God, May 30th. Ms. Cotton, 2015. Unidentified male speaker, 2015. President Biden, was it 2015 he died? President Biden, was it 2015 he had died? Undefined male speaker, it was May of 2015. President Biden, it was 2015. Mr. Bauer, or I'm not sure the month, sir, but I think that was the year. Mr. Crickbaum, that's right, Mr. President, President Biden. And what's happened in the meantime is that and Trump gets elected in November 2017. Unidentified male speaker, 2016. Unidentified male speaker, 16. President Biden, 16. 2016. All right, so why do I have 2017 here? Mr. Siskel, that's when you left office, January of 2017. President Biden, yeah, okay, but that's when Trump gets sworn in then, January. Mr. Siskel, right. Mr. Bauer, right, correct.
But you had this congressional hearing today where Republicans and Democrats were grilling Robert Hur, and they're both grilling him because they're both kind of angry with him, which is the very interesting dynamic of this hearing. You had the Republicans who are grilling Robert Hur by saying, you had all the factual elements of improper handling or mishandling of classified documents. All the factual elements in the world. You had the intent, you had the knowledge, because people were making the argument, Joe Biden knew how you were supposed to handle classified information and how you were not supposed to handle classified documentation, because he's been in government for 50 freaking years. He knew, or ought to have known, how you are supposed to handle or not handle classified documentation, because he was going after Trump for allegedly having mishandled classified documentation. Trump, of course, is being indicted for that, which is the talking point that the Democrats needed to get out of this hearing. The Republicans are coming out and saying, how do you come to these conclusions of fact and then come to the conclusion of law that you choose not to recommend charges or indictment against Joe Biden. The Democrats come out and say, this is totally different than Donald Trump's mishandling of classified documentation, because Joe Biden was a well-meaning individual who kept it in a place that was not open to the public. Horse crap, first of all. It was, in fact, probably more open to random meandering drug dealers, prostitutes, and crack addicts than the documentation that President Trump took and left at Mar-a-Lago, an area where he was secure and able to act as president. But the Democrats come out and they need to draw the distinction, because their boy, Joe Biden, is not facing charges because he didn't do anything wrong. And how dare how dare Robert Hur come to the conclusion that although Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong, he's still damned to be the old man with a bad memory, a political potshot at Joe Biden. But the Democrats come out, each and every single one of them, running the exact same talking point line of questions. Well, Donald Trump took the documents, but his mishandling consists of not giving them back when it was so demanded, as though that is an undisputed fact of law, that Donald Trump had to give back documents that might very well have been, and in fact arguably are, his documents under the Presidential Records Act. Both of them took out what were, I don't think, disputed classified documents. The big difference? Joe Biden was vice president when he did it, and Joe Biden was senator when he did it. Donald Trump was president when he did it. But the Democrats have to come out and say, these two things are totally different, which explains why Joe Biden's not getting charged and Donald Trump is getting charged. So they harp, each and every single one of them, in their grandstanding lectures of 5 minutes. Well, Joe Biden cooperated with everybody, right? He sat down for a whopping 5-hour interview over 2 days after October 7, when the world was in turmoil. He's a good boy. He sat down, he cooperated, he collaborated. He didn't hide anything except for what he had been hiding for decades. But when he got caught, he fully collaborated, fully cooperated. But big bad Donald Trump, after he was told to return documents which were arguably but not arguably his under the Presidential Records Act, he was talking with his attorneys and deciding whether or not he had to return these documents. So they had to draw the distinction in order to justify the charges that were brought against Trump and the charges that were not brought against Joe Biden. The Republicans come out and say, how do you not indict after you find all of these matters of fact that he deliberately took them out, left them in unsecured areas, and gave them to his ghostwriter? Because this was a key element that the Republicans were harping on. Joe Biden, while all of this is going on, is giving access to classified information to a ghostwriter who's writing a biography on Joe Biden. He wants to control his legacy. He wants to make sure the world remembers him as what he remembered himself as, to the extent he has a memory. And so he's giving access to classified information to his ghostwriter, admittedly. And then his ghostwriter, once he discovers that there's an investigation ongoing, starts to delete information, delete documentation that Joe Biden gave him. And Ben Hur was again asked the question, why didn't you press any charges against the ghostwriter who deleted documents once he became aware of the fact that this investigation was ongoing? And Robert Hur's explanation was, well, we had copies elsewhere, so no harm, no foul. So it's a wild double standard here. You have Joe Biden taking out classified documents when he is not president, not returning them, keeping them in unsecured locations, giving access to this classified information to a ghostwriter who's writing a book, his biography, not facing charges, none of them. Not facing charges because Robert Hur concludes that no jury would convict Joe Biden. As if Robert Hur's position in law right now, at this point, is to decide what a jury would find after all of the evidence were to be adduced. After all of this evidence, they would likely find that Joe Biden is too much of a well-meaning elderly individual with a poor memory, but he cooperated, he collaborated. That's what the Republicans were pissed about. Democrats come out and have to hammer home the distinction. His memory was good. You misrepresented that he didn't remember when his son died. Oh, but he said May 30th. Oh God, May 30th. That's the talking point of the day. If you read the full paragraph of what Joe Biden said there, it's a meandering Abe Simpson quote that ends in May 30th and then ends in Joe Biden having to ask the room what year his son died in. Now, I'm inclined to give Joe the benefit of the doubt on that. I have difficulty remembering reflexively when my children were born. That's not the issue here. They're making it so much of a talking point that they're distracting from everything else, which is at issue here. The issue is not that he forgot when his son died. The issue is not that he might have forgotten when he became VP. I mean, these things are kind of tough to remember, although it's kind of easy to remember. 2008 to 2016 was Obama. They're making hay out of the fact that he allegedly remembered when his son died and ignoring all of the other damning information. He didn't have the right to do what he did. He did it anyhow, in full awareness of fact and law. He knew damn well he wasn't supposed to take it. He knew damn well he wasn't supposed to give access of classified information to a ghostwriter. He knew damn well. But You know, it's a two-tier system. Rules for thee, but not for me. Joe Biden cooperated after mishandling classified information, and they argue that Donald Trump didn't, when there's a better argument in law that Donald Trump never had to have given back the documentation that he took, which were his personal records. All right, set that all aside. Jim Jordan got a couple of good talking points in there in his... he took the time of other people who, what is it called, gave their time to him. I'll play a clip of that now so you can appreciate his grandstanding, if you want to call it that, but at least he makes some concrete points.
Why did Joe Biden, in your words, willfully retain and disclose classified materials? I mean, he knew the law. Been in office like 50 years. 5 decades in the United States Senate, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 8 years as vice president. He got briefed every day as vice president. He's been in the Situation Room. In fact, you know he knew the rules because you said so on page 226. President Biden was deeply familiar with the measures taken to safeguard classified documents. And Joe Biden told us he knew the rules. Mr. Armstrong said this earlier. Joe Biden was deeply familiar with it. You're exactly right, because he told us when Jack Smith goes after President Trump, Joe Biden says, how could this happen? What data was in those documents that could compromise sources and methods? It's irresponsible. So Joe Biden knew the rules. You know he knew the rules. And Joe Biden told us he knew the rules. So, Mr. Hur, why did he break them?
Congressman, the conclusion as to exactly why the president did what he did is not one that we explicitly address in the report. The report explains my decision to the Attorney General that no criminal charges were warranted in this matter.
And then coming to Adam Schiff for brains, McSchiffface. Holy crab apples. Adam Schiff had a 2-minute back and forth with Robert Hur, which ended in what I think to be an outright threat. You'll listen to it and you'll tell me what you think.
You understood that. You made a choice. That was a political choice. It was the wrong choice.
But B, he made a point in that speech, which now, going back to Robert Mueller's report, makes a whole hell of a lot more sense. I'm going to play you that clip and then I'm going to comment on it. Enjoy this in all its glory.
And you also understand DOJ policy that you are to take care not to prejudice the interests of the subject of an investigation, right?
That is generally one of the interests that DOJ policy requires that prosecutors respect.
And it was your obligation to follow that policy in this report, was it not?
It was also my obligation to write a confidential report for the Attorney General explaining completely my
What
decision.
you did write was deeply prejudicial to the interests of the president. You say it wasn't political, and yet you must have understood. You must have understood the impact of your words. You must have understood the impact of your decision to go beyond the specifics of a particular document, to go to the very general, to your own personal, prejudicial, subjective opinion of the president, one you knew would be amplified by his political opponent, one you knew that would influence a political campaign. You had to understand that. And you did it anyway. And you did it anyway. And let me just go to some of the differences here between the president's conduct and Mr. Trump's. In the superseding indictment, on page 3, it says that Mr. Trump suggested that his attorney falsely represent to the FBI and grand jury that he did not have documents called for by the grand jury subpoena. You didn't find anything like that with respect to Mr. Biden, did you?
Congressman, I do not have the Trump indictment in front of me, but I need to address something that you said in your prior question. What you were suggesting is that I needed to provide a different version of my report that would be fit for public release. That is nowhere in the rules. I was to prepare a confidential report that was comprehensive and thorough of an explanation.
What is in the
of my
rules,
decision,
Mr.
Attorney General.
Hur, what is in the rules is you don't gratuitously do things to prejudice the subject of an investigation when you're declining to prosecute. You don't gratuitously add language that you know will be useful in a political campaign. You were not born yesterday. You understood exactly what you were doing. It was a choice. You certainly didn't have to include that language. You could have said, vis-a-vis the documents that were found at the university, the president did not recall. There is nothing more common. You know this, I know this. There is nothing more common with a witness of any age when asked about events that are years old to say, I do not recall. Indeed, they're instructed by their attorney to do that if they have any question about it. You understood that. You made a choice. That was a political choice. It was the wrong choice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
So here at the end, you have Adam Schiff menacingly saying to Robert Hur, you made a political choice and you made the wrong one. And now that we know, thanks to, what's his face? Not Herb Nadler, the other guy, Chuck Schumer, that the intelligence has 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Now that Robert Hur knows he made a political choice and he made the wrong one, I would be looking over my back for a little while if I'm Robert Hur. But the more important thing, the more important substantive point that Schiff made in that tirade to Robert Hur, you added something that was prejudicial to the person that you were investigating, even though your ultimate conclusion was not going to be to recommend charges. Why would you do something like that? You knew the political import that would have. You're choosing not to charge him. Why make any prejudicial statements at such an important time when you know that those politically charged statements are going to harm the person? Flashback to what Robert Mueller said in his report in conclusion. They're not charging Donald Trump with anything. They can't find any collusion, but they can't exonerate him either. Holy crab apples, talk about adding unnecessary verbiage that you know is going to have a political impact at a politically sensitive time. Adam Schiff is only telegraphing what they do, what they have done in the past, as perfectly exemplified by Robert Mueller. Why would you include such damning additional verbiage if your conclusion were not to press charges, not to recommend an indictment? Good question, Adam Schiff. That's probably exactly why Robert Mueller added those very, very impactful words that Democrats ran with forever. Although we can't find evidence of collusion, we cannot exonerate him either, as though it's ever been the role of an investigation to exonerate someone as opposed to find guilt. So that is the essence of what you need to know. It's political grandstanding at its finest. It's predictive. Whenever I heard someone grandstanding, I could predict that they were Democrats. There were a couple of Republicans who did it as well. Oddly enough, the one Republican who I said, this dude's grandstanding, happened to be a Democrat before he became a Republican, was wearing a purple tie. Perfect marriage of colors and politics. The grandstanding, it was just over the top, endless. Every single one of the Democrats came in with the same points. He cooperated. His memory wasn't that bad. Donald Trump's case is different because he didn't cooperate. Every single one of them, the Republicans made some good points. That's the essence of what you need to know. What's going to happen? What's going to come of all this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It is political theater. It's so that these people can think that they have earned their exceedingly high salaries. An amazing thing, by the way, in the transcript interview of Robert Hur and Joe Biden brags about how he was listed as one of the poorest members of Congress. No, the poorest member of Congress. For years, he was labeled that way. He ain't the poorest member of Congress anymore. Now his net worth is estimated at $10 million, and it's only going to go up when he leaves office. Although, if he gets reelected and serves his full second term, he's going to be 86 years old when he leaves office. 86 years old. 4 more years of this Joe Biden, given the rapid, exceedingly obvious decline that we've seen over the last 4 years. Can you imagine what an 86-year-old Joe Biden is going to look like in the White House? I can't imagine it. I'm still sticking to my prediction that he's not going to be on the ballot for one reason or another. The media is out now pushing Kamala Harris as a palpable alternative to Joe Biden. We'll see what happens, but that's the summary. Enjoy it. That is 4 hours synthesized, so you don't have to suffer like we did this afternoon. If you like what I do, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. Viva Frei on Rumble. The Viva Frei on Twitter. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com on locals. And now you know your vlog. Enjoy the night, peeps.